Hey folks, David Stewart here. Let's talk a little bit about Star Wars. Today we're going to talk about The Empire Strikes Back, the second Star Wars movie. This is not my full analysis video. Instead, I wanted to make just a shorter video focusing on one important question and attempting to answer it, which is why people like The Empire Strikes Back so much. Because the more people I meet, and the more Star Wars fans I meet in particular, the more the focus tends to be on this, the second Star Wars movie, as the best Star Wars movie or the best example of what a Star Wars movie ought to be. And of course, there's more to it than it just being a good movie, because of course it's a well-made movie. I think the reason people focus on this movie is because it does certain things a little bit better and a little bit different than a lot of other Star Wars movies. This movie spends most of its capital, if you will, its screen capital, its screen time. It spends it not on the plot, but on the characters and on the setting. And if you're going to think about what makes Star Wars successful, what has allowed it to enfranchise itself over multiple decades, it's the depth of the setting, and it is the likability and the love of the characters, even the bad characters. You notice how many people loved to cosplay as not just stormtroopers, but Darth Vader, the bad guy himself. People get really attached to the ideas of the villains in Star Wars as well as the heroes, and The Empire Strikes Back is a great example of this. In fact, I think if The Empire Strikes Back had not been the movie that it is, I don't think Star Wars would have been successful as it is, because we'd be missing some of these attachments to the characters. If you were to look at the plot holistically, you'd see that it's actually pretty simple. It's the most plot-light Star Wars movie, and instead of overburdening the viewer with lots of complicated plot points, they instead spend most of their screen time with characters interacting and developing relationships. And that's something that audiences really attach themselves to. So if you're a creator, if you're an author or a comic artist or a screenwriter, if you have a choice between really focusing on plot elements, unless you're writing something like a thriller that is really needs to be all plot, choosing characters over other elements that you might have in your story is probably a pretty safe bet, because characters are what people get attached to. Characters are what creates sequels. If you look at the original Star Wars movie, at the end, the Death Star's blown up. There was really no need for a sequel. If there was only one Star Wars movie, things would have been okay with that story. But of course, audiences wanted more. And if they wanted more than just the special effects, they wanted more than just the setting, because the setting was a very compelling setting. They wanted the characters. And so that's what you get mainly in The Empire Strikes Back. You have a pretty simple setup for the plot, and most of the plot is spent with the heroes kind of in a passive state, kind of running away from Darth Vader or avoiding conflict until you get to that final act where everything kind of accelerates towards that fight between Luke and Vader. But in the meantime, you have Han Solo and Leia developing a romance, an on-screen romance that still remains pretty convincing almost 40 years now after the fact. And then you have Luke learning about the Force with Yoda. And so the prime romance there between Leia and Han, that's a really great character-focused B story. And the conflict for that, by the way, is actually set up in the first act, and I'll talk more in depth about this in another video. But it's done indirectly through some dialogue. They set up that Han wants Leia to have feelings for him, and she refuses to acknowledge feelings. They're forced together in a escape situation, and then through that they actually are able to express how they feel about each other. And then there's a final matriculation in the last act where Hans is frozen. And that freezing of Han has a big impact on the audience, because we've seen finally this romance come together, and rather than it having a happy ending or a standard kind of resolution, you have the hero getting frozen in carbonite, or the male actor being frozen in carbonite, essentially being killed off or severely harmed, which puts this entire relationship in a much sadder state. Then the A story, what I might call the A story, is really Luke interacting with Yoda. And so what you get there is you get a big exploration of Luke's character. You have Luke transitioning from an everyman character, like he is in the first film, into a messianic character. And I will talk about messianic characters in a separate video as well. but he transitions into a somewhat naive messianic character, and it's about his growth and him trying to understand the spirituality of what he's been tasked with. But through that interaction with Yoda, the very interesting and strange character of Yoda that has two sides. One side is happy Muppet puppet. The other side is very serious, dark, brooding leader or instructor. Through that interaction, you have a big exposition, an indirect exposition of the much deeper layers of the setting, the idea of this magical thing called the Force, which controls everything, and how you use it, how you interact with it, how you gain power through it. It's extremely important that those scenes exist to power Luke up, and also to let the audience know the depth of this universe that George Lucas had created. And so when you have these two things combined, these really great explorations of character and this great exposition of the setting, you have a great setup for a third movie, and not just a third movie, but you have all of the extended universe stuff which happened in novels and games and all these other different little franchise elements before the prequels came out. You had a huge amount of that get spawned basically from the interest that Empire Strikes Back created, because the Return of the Jedi is all about closing that cycle. It's a lot like the first movie, except it really closes things off. But that middle movie is really about exposition. It's really about showing who the characters are. It's about showing what the setting does. And indeed, it's not just heroes, it is Darth Vader. The main plot goals are really executed by Darth Vader. It's about what he wants to do. And so you get some amazing glimpses into Darth Vader, and it's executed so well because it doesn't just show you Darth Vader and give you a huge backstory. It creates a huge amount of mystery as to who he is. You see these scenes of him in this pod where his helmet's being taken off, and you see this scarred, disfigured head from behind, and you never see his face, but you see his helmet being lowered down, and you see the reaction of the actor. He finds Vader grotesque and frightening, but he would dare not speak it. And so then finally Vader turns around after having the helmet put on, and he's more like a robot. He's more faceless and unknowable once the helmet comes on. So you get this glimpse underneath the helmet that there's a tragic and horribly scarred and a figure that's in a lot of pain. And you also get some exposition as to this mysterious emperor figure that you didn't really get in the first movie because there wasn't really time to explain all that to the audience. So you get a whole lot more explanation as to how this empire works. That it's not just Vader and some other imperial officials. There is an emperor, and he is the master of Darth Vader, and the Darth Vader is truly a subscriber to a dark philosophy, a subscriber to a dark religion. You also have lots of scenes where Darth Vader gets to be really evil, which is really important. We want to see the villain being the next level of power than he was in the first movie. We want to see him be really, really wicked. So in the first movie, you see him choke some people. You see him even choke people that work for him, fellow Imperial officers. And in this one, you see him execute people for failing him. And you see the expanse of his power, and it's really to ramp him up as a threat. But it doesn't just ramp him up as a threat; it ramps him up as an interesting character unto himself. And so that showing part of what he is and then showing his power makes people so much more interested in Darth Vader. Because the third movie, if you look at Darth Vader in Return of the Jedi, Darth Vader is a much more passive character than he is in The Empire Strikes Back. He's much more waiting for Luke to come to him, and he's much more uncertain about where he's going to end up with Sidious and Luke in those the final act there in Return of the Jedi. So in Empire Strikes Back, though, it's really all about Darth Vader pursuing his goals. And a lot of people focus on the twist at the end, this revelation that Darth Vader is, in fact, Luke's father. And if that's a spoiler for you, I guess you've been under a rock for a long time. But everything focuses on that because of the way those character arcs end up working. And that becomes a really powerful moment because we really feel for Luke. We've seen Luke grow through 2 movies. We've seen him struggle. We've seen him have a messianic burden put on him. And then we see him receive a temptation in the desert. I'll talk about this in some other videos. But we see him finally in a really bad spot. So our heroes end in a bad spot. And there's something about having your heroes be hurt that makes you get more attached to them, because that makes the overcoming of that obstacle all the more potent later on, and it makes you really root for them. You really want them to succeed. You really want them to find a way out of their predicaments. And so just that little element there, that little plot element of not a little plot element, but all the little plot elements of the heroes being hurt. C-3PO gets destroyed. There's all these things that happen that put the heroes in a bad spot. That makes you get more attached to them. So those are some of the things that I really think about with Empire Strikes Back. As far as the setting stuff, it's not just the explanation of the Force through Yoda. You also get to see a much more fantastic set of environments than you saw in the first movie. Rather than seeing a desert planet and a white and black Death Star and Imperial starships, you get to see a snow planet, a jungle planet, this amazing city in the clouds, and the aesthetics from Cloud City you see just get copied over and over again in all the derivative Star Wars stuff. So much so that if you were to look at some of the production pictures for Rogue One, you'll see the hallways from that Cloud City set being replicated. Even some of them that didn't end up in the movie at all. They just used the photos for promotion purposes, which confused a lot of people, including me, when I didn't see them in the movie. Though they might have been in the original. They might have been in the original director's cut, which would very much interest me. But those aesthetics end up being the Star Wars aesthetics. So it finally refines and expands the aesthetics enough that we feel like we're looking at a vast and interesting universe that we want to see more of, and we want to feel more of, and we want our heroes to explore more of. So that's why I think Empire Strikes Back is as beloved as it is. It's no accident that they chose to do these things, or perhaps it was an accident, but it's no accident that people love the movie the way they do, even though it doesn't have the strictest plot or the most interesting plot structure compared to the other movies. Rather than spending their capital on story points, they spend their capital on developing characters, and I think it ends up being paid off. So if you're a writer, if you're a screenwriter or comic artist, consider, if you have a choice, consider characters over some other elements that you maybe want to explore, or make sure that you're always having character development amongst those other things, and it'll probably end up having a better payoff for your audience than if you really focused hard on making sure every single plot point is happening in the correct paced sort of way. So those are my thoughts on that. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Links are down below to my websites if you want to support me. I'm no longer on Patreon, but you can buy a book. They're all over Amazon, and you can find them on dvspress.com. Just a reminder, I do the Right stream every Wednesday at 6 Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern here in the United States. So if you're outside of the United States, you'll have to figure out that difference based on West Coast United States Pacific time. But I do that, so drop by and you can ask any questions. I'm going to do that every week, basically from here on out, and I'm really happy to do that. I have a lot of great interactions, and I've had a lot of fun doing that. So make sure you drop by Wednesdays at 6, and I'll see you guys next time.